It started like any other quiet Tuesday morning in the mountains of western Maryland. The town of Westernport felt calm. The air was thick with the smell of rain, and life moved at its usual slow pace. Kids were heading to school, shopkeepers were unlocking their doors, and the streets carried that small-town hum, peaceful, familiar, ordinary. But far above the ridges, the sky was already shifting. Dark clouds began to roll in, heavy, slow, and full of something no one expected. By early afternoon, daylight dimmed to a cold, gray tone. Thunder rumbled across the valley, and then the skies just opened up. Rain came down hard, sheets of it. The ground, already soaked from earlier storms, couldn't take another drop. Water started rushing down the hillsides, faster and faster, all of it racing toward George Creek below. Then it happened, the creek overflowed. Within hours, the town was underwater. Cars floated down Main Street like toys in a stream. Storefronts disappeared beneath waves of muddy, churning water. Landmarks that had stood for decades were swallowed in moments. This wasn't a hurricane. It wasn't a dam breaking. It was a flash flood, sudden, fierce, and unstoppable. In less than 6 hours, the water climbed nearly 7 feet, the highest level anyone had seen since 1996. Streets turned into rivers. Schools stood like stranded islands. And homes that carried generations of memories, were lost beneath the flood. When the storm finally passed, the water began to pull back, but what it left behind was haunting. The silence that followed spoke louder than any siren, a silence filled with loss, disbelief, and the realization that Westernport would never be quite the same again. It all started quietly, just another gray October morning. A storm system had drifted out of the Midwest, crawling its way toward the tri-state area of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. At first, it seemed harmless, just a slow, steady rain tapping against windows and rooftops. But this storm had no plans to leave. Hour after hour, the clouds grew darker and heavier. By midday, the rain wasn't just falling, it was pounding. Sheets of water slammed down on the region, flooding streets and hammering everything in sight. Some areas saw more than 5 inches of rain in just a few hours. The kind of downpour that drowns drains, softens hillsides, and tests the patience of everyone watching the water rise inch by inch. The ground, already soaked from earlier storms, couldn't take any more. Water began racing down steep hillsides, carving fresh paths through fields and neighborhoods. Streams turned into rivers, and in the narrow valley of George Creek, it all came together.
Oh my God.
What was once a gentle creek transformed into a raging, muddy torrent, roaring louder by the minute. Storm drains burst, bridges groaned under the pressure, and people realized this wasn't just another rainstorm. This was something far worse. Meteorologists across western Maryland started to sound the alarm. The storm wasn't moving, it was stuck, spinning in place, dumping everything it had on the same small towns. And for Westernport, it was a nightmare setup. A slow, stubborn storm colliding with terrain too steep to fight back. By the time the rain hit its peak, there was no turning back. The water had already claimed the streets, the homes, and the quiet peace of this small town. Westernport wasn't just facing a storm, it was being swallowed by it. By early afternoon, the town of Westernport was fighting a losing battle against the storm. What started as small puddles on the streets quickly grew into raging streams cutting through the town. The drains that were supposed to keep the streets dry were now overflowing, spilling water back into the neighborhoods they were built to protect. The rain pounded non-stop, a deafening roar mixed with blaring sirens, desperate shouts, and the cracking sounds of walls giving way. Within minutes, Main Street was gone, swallowed by a fast-moving river of muddy water. Cars floated like toys, smashing into storefronts and streetlights before being carried away by the current. Basement windows shattered, doors burst open, family memories, photos, furniture, and keepsakes, all swept away in the chaos. With every passing second, the destruction grew worse. Another wave, Another collapse. Another piece of the town lost beneath the storm. The George Creek had completely burst its banks, slicing Westernport right down the middle. Power lines crackled as transformers blew up in the distance, plunging entire neighborhoods into total darkness. The air reeked of gasoline, mud, and fear. People rushed to higher ground. Some climbed onto rooftops, others clung to fences as the raging current ripped through their yards. Those trapped inside their homes could only wait, hoping someone would come. Cell service vanished. Calls for help went unanswered. The peaceful valley, once a safe spot between the Green Mountains, had turned into a massive lake of chaos. Streets, homes, and memories disappeared beneath the water's surface, leaving only silence. By the time rescue teams arrived, it was too late. The water was too high, too fast, too fierce. Westernport, a quiet mountain town, was now unrecognizable. A place rewritten by the flood, where the boundary between land and river was gone forever. I'm standing here in Southport, North Carolina, where heavy rain has triggered a dangerous flash flood. It all started earlier today, when George Creek, usually just a calm little stream winding through Westernport, began to rise faster than anyone expected. What was once peaceful and quiet soon turned into a violent, muddy river. The water roared louder than thunder, carrying branches, debris, and pieces of people's lives downstream. By mid-afternoon, the situation became critical. Water levels surged more than 7 feet in just 6 hours, flooding far beyond the creek's banks and cutting straight through town. It was a scene not seen here since the historic floods of 1996. Entire neighborhoods disappeared under waves of brown water. Streets became rivers. Cars floated down Main Street, smashing into storefronts and lampposts. Wooden fences were ripped apart and carried away. Even emergency crews couldn't reach some areas. The current was just too strong. Residents stood by their windows, watching helplessly as the flood swallowed everything they owned. Families grabbed whatever they could, photos, medicine, pets, and ran for higher ground. But for some, the water rose too fast. Many found themselves trapped inside their homes, surrounded by the deafening rush of the creek-turned monster. By evening, George Creek had completely overpowered the town's defenses. Floodwater poured into basements, schools, and streets, washing away memories built over decades. As night fell over Westernport, it was clear this wasn't just another storm. It was Maryland's most devastating flood in nearly 30 years. As the floodwaters tore through Westernport, the town faced one of its darkest hours. Inside Westernport Elementary School, panic slowly turned to fear when the rising water surrounded the building. By the time the emergency sirens went off, escape was no longer an option. Water surged across the parking lot, climbed the steps, and pressed hard against classroom doors. Within an hour, it had swallowed the first floor, trapping more than 150 students and 50 staff members inside. Inside those hallways, chaos met courage. Teachers guided students to the upper floors, handing out snacks and doing everything they could to keep the kids calm while rain hammered against the glass. Outside, desperate parents stood in the storm, watching rescue teams fight the brutal current. The roads were gone, completely underwater, cutting off every route in or out of the area. Across Allegheny County, the story was no different. In nearby towns, school buses stopped mid-route as bridges disappeared beneath the floodwaters. Schools turned into shelters. Power went out. Phone lines failed. The entire region's infrastructure simply couldn't handle a storm of this magnitude. When rescuers finally reached Westernport Elementary, they arrived in small boats, moving carefully through freezing, debris-filled water. Each trip meant risking their own lives, but they did it anyway. One by one, the children were carried out, cold, terrified, but alive. As the final rescue boat pulled away, exhausted responders looked back at the school, a silent reminder of how fast an ordinary day can turn into a nightmare. That night, the classroom stood empty and dark, surrounded by the echoes of water that came too fast, too strong, and left a community forever changed. Through the night, emergency crews from all over Allegheny County rushed toward Westernport, racing against rising water and precious time. Firefighters, medics, and local volunteers launched rescue boats into streets that had turned into fast-moving rivers. Floodlights shimmered across the muddy water as teams moved door to door, shouting for anyone still trapped inside their homes. Every rescue came with danger. Every second counted. At the town's elementary school, the parking lot transformed into a command center. Police cars and ambulances lined up in the pouring rain while soaked crews unloaded gear and mapped out evacuation plans. Radios buzzed non-stop. Reports of blocked roads, missing residents, and collapsing bridges filled the air. With power outages across multiple neighborhoods, rescuers were forced to work in almost complete darkness, guided only by flashlights and flashes of lightning splitting the sky. In nearby communities like Laurel Run and Barton, things were even worse. Entire roads had vanished under floodwater, leaving families stranded on patches of high ground. Helicopters circled overhead, marking locations for rescuers below. Pickup trucks, ropes, and pure determination. That's what volunteers used to pull people from half-submerged cars and flooded homes. Many first responders pushed through 12, even 14-hour shifts, refusing to stop despite exhaustion. By midnight, over 100 residents had been rescued and taken to temporary shelters. Churches and community centers opened their doors, offering warmth, food, and a dry place to rest. This storm didn't just test the town's emergency systems, it tested the strength of its people. Trained crews and everyday citizens stood side by side, proving that courage can rise even higher than the floodwaters. And still, the rain kept falling. As the long night dragged on, the people of Westernport fought not just against the storm, but against the fear that the dawn might never come. When the storm finally passed, Westernport fell completely silent. The streets that once echoed with laughter and traffic were now buried under thick layers of mud and broken debris. The air smelled of soaked wood, diesel, and heartbreak as residents returned to what used to be their homes. Front porches had caved in. Power lines drooped dangerously low. Cars were tossed around like toys in a wasteland of destruction. For many, it was hard to tell where the creek ended and where the town began. In the days that followed, rescue slowly turned into recovery. Neighbors worked side by side, clearing wreckage from what was left of their community. Volunteers showed up with food, water, and blankets. And first responders, many of whom hadn't slept in over 24 hours, stayed to help rebuild what the flood had taken away. But beneath that incredible resilience lies an uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just another natural disaster. It was a warning. Across America, flash floods like this are becoming more frequent, driven by storms that are stronger, slower, and far less predictable. The flood that drowned Westernport was once called a once-in-a-lifetime event. But those lifetimes are getting shorter. Westernport will rebuild. Its people will push forward as they always have. But the question is, how many more towns like this will have to sink before we truly prepare for the storms we know are coming? Because the next flood, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. If the story moved you, don't just scroll past. Like this video to help raise climate awareness. Share it so more people understand what's ahead. And subscribe for more real-world disaster stories and global coverage that truly matters.